This question from McBuckets516 on Instagram. Are Barcelona running the risk of having more financial issues in signing Rashford over Nico Williams? If you had a choice, Rashford or Nico Williams, Nicky?
Ooh. My brain was on the first part of that question as you were asking it, which is, are they running a risk financially? I just think a Barcelona at any given moment not running a financial risk was my thought as you were saying that. Made me think of a friend of mine who I remember at university had run up the complete overdraft on her bank card and then got a job in the university shop, and I was like, okay, then then she's spending more money. Oh, well, she's got a job. No, she's got a second overdraft. She's got a second bank account. That's the Barcelona model. Maybe
that's a good example.
Maybe you get the job at the university shop, but you still also get yourself a second overdraft and keep running financial risks. I don't know about which I would rather, but I definitely interested in and excited in the idea of Rashford at Barcelona. Maybe that's my perspective as an outsider rather than representing Barcelona, because I don't represent Barcelona. I think he had such an interesting little chapter last season, didn't he, at Villa, and I think that seeing him go after this deeply unhappy period for the club at Manchester United and have the chance to express his talent somewhere completely different is really fascinating. It feels somewhat incongruous still in my head to picture Lamine Yamal and Marcus Rashford in the same team. I'm not totally sure that I understand how it works tactically, but I think he's talented enough to go and make it work. So
it's salivating, isn't it? The idea of Lamine Yamal with Marcus Rashford as a striking force for Barcelona. But he hasn't gone. Let's be quite clear. This is a loan deal, as it was when he went to Aston Villa. Yeah, and I think if we go on to McBucket's question, great name by the way, about running the risk of having more financial issues, Rashford is definitely the cheaper option than Nico Williams, because they don't have to pay a transfer fee for him, not for the moment anyway. And to my mind, Rashford is going to have a really, really great season for them to want to sign him permanently, because it's a big financial commitment, even with the fact that he's taken a wage cut, a very considerable wage cut to go there. It's unlikely that they would have been paying Nico Williams less, and they would have had to pay nearly 60 million transfer fee as well. So look, this is a better deal financially for Barcelona. Now, I suppose we have to ask, as we do every time Barcelona sign a player, is will he be registered for the start of the season? Yes, after last season. We have to ask that, because it happened to Dani Olmo twice last season. It was one of the reasons that Nico Williams didn't go, because he couldn't be guaranteed. Like, they said, oh, it'll be fine. But that's not a guarantee, is it? And especially when Javier Tebas, the president of the league, is going, at the moment, until you shift some players off the books, you cannot register this player to play. Now, look, there's no immediate panic. La Liga doesn't start for a month. But that month is going to go pretty quickly, and they're going to have to shift some players that they don't want, which they have historically, in the recent past, not been particularly good at doing. So when we're talking about risk, I think you could argue the risk is more on Rashford's side than on the Barcelona side at the moment. In terms of how he'll fit, it's been made pretty clear that Hansi Flick isn't going to include him in the 11 immediately. The idea is he sees him, and Deco, the sporting director, talked about having cover for the front three as being the priority, that he is going to be that left-sided player that Nico Williams would have been for them, that he's going to be on the left-hand side of attack cutting in. So that makes him Rafinha locum for the moment. Now, presumably, he could stand in on the right-hand side if they wanted to give Lamine Yamal a bit of a rest as well. Flick seems to have said he's not going to play centre-forward in case Lewandowski's not there. That would be a different profile of player. That would be Ferran Torres, or that would be even Dani Olmo playing as a sort of false nine. That would be the case. So I, like Nicky, am reasonably optimistic that it can work out. I think because Marcus Rashford sort of provoke such big reactions in people
in the UK, but
yeah,
not necessarily
in the UK. But in terms of how we judge him and how we judge in the UK, whether that's going to work or not, this is definitely relevant, because people either see him as a greater figure than football, as a lot of people do, and my family, even the ones that are not interested in football, absolutely love him, or people see him for his football output over the last couple of years and look at the fact that he's enormously talented and he hasn't come anywhere near fulfilling that talent in recent years. But I think we saw that in the spell that he was at Aston Villa, that reactions to him are so unbalanced. Either people think, oh, he's been brilliant, he's amazing, he's back, or they think, well, what's the big deal? When actually I think the truth is somewhere in between. There was plenty to like about Marcus Rashford at Aston Villa. I think, especially if you're in the financial position that Aston Villa were in, there was nothing to suggest that they were going to go out and buy him permanently, because, again, enormous financial commitment. And I don't think he showed enough in that period to think you want to bet everything on him. He's kind of on trial again, really, isn't he?
Which kind of brings us to the conversation we had on the main show this week, again, because he's at the same age. He's the same age as this Ademola Lookman. He's at the point of his career where you can't sign him expecting you're going to be able to sell him on for something. And I think that's the tricky part for Rashford, is that this has to go so well to even imagine how Barcelona would have the funds to, or consider finding the funds to put on the table to make it a permanent deal, because they know they can't get a permanent they know they can't get profit out of him. And I think that's a problem for him wherever he goes. But what I do think is interesting when we draw that comparison with Nico Williams, I've seen headlines saying, "Oh, Nico Williams wasn't brave enough, or he was too scared to go and take on this risk going to Barcelona, stay where you are." And I hate those narratives. I find them really tedious. People are human beings who have all sorts of reasons why they might prefer to stay at a club, and those can be footballing. And I'm certain Nico Williams has footballing reasons. They can also be not footballing, and it's not some, I don't know, it's not some black and white media narrative of being afraid. But I do think what I would say on the flip side of that is it does take a certain courage to be willing to put yourself out there and keep trying new things. And I think that I do believe that Marcus Rashford goes there with that to him. He has that, he backs himself. I think all this narrative around him, people who, as you say, have tended to view him in very extreme context. Either he's the best thing as he was early in his career, or he's terrible because he's not scoring as many goals as people want him to. And I think that more important than anyone else's narrative is, does he believe he can go to Barca and succeed? And I'm inclined to think he does. And I think that's why he'll have as good a chance as he can to. Because I think he had that, frankly, again, with last season's loan move, it's about someone saying, do you know what, I'm not happy here, and I think I can go and be a success there, and I'm going to back myself to go and do it.
Yeah, another striker from over here who's treading the waters on the road to the common market once upon a time. How will, and this question is from Adam on email, how will Evan Ferguson get on at Roma after his disastrous loan spell at West Ham, Nicky?
Yeah, I'm very excited to find out. I feel like all of our stories, in my head anyway, are all linking back to each other this week, because of course we talked so much about Atalanta on the main show, and this is going to Roma, where Gianpiero Gasperini, who came from Atalanta, is now in charge. And if I was a young footballer hoping to get my career kickstarted again, especially if I was a forward, I can't imagine any manager in Europe I'd rather be working under than Gasperini, who continually at Atalanta made everyone there look like more than the sum of their parts. So I think in that sense, it feels like a great move for him. And it feels like a good move perhaps for both clubs, because Roma are getting a loan deal this season and the option to make it permanent if he is a success. So there's incentive there for them to make it a success, because if he's great, then they can sign him, and they've got an asset who, because of his age, continues to appreciate and be worth more long term. But the fee that's been set, I think, is been reported anyway at 38 million euros. That's not a bad price for Brighton either. So it feels like a situation where everyone is incentivized to make it a success. It feels like the opportunity is there. for him at Roma. For now, at least, it's pretty much a direct like for like, I would say, with him up front and Artem Dovbyk. So it's going to be, I imagine, Dovbyk starting to start the season, but they're playing in Europe again this season. There's going to be lots of games to go around. There will be plenty of opportunities. And they haven't really got, with Tammy Abraham moving out, again, there's not really another number 9. There's not really another option. It's those two. You've got Paulo Dybala, who can play in theory at number 9, but that's not what they want him. They want him playing in more of a free role. I think when you look at Ferguson's strengths as a very prototypical number 9, the size, the way he occupies defenders, I think that is absolutely his job. I think it's impossible for me to sit here and say will it be a success or not, because frankly, we've seen so little of him coming off these injuries. What we have seen, he hasn't looked like the player he first was when he burst onto the scene, and that's quite normal for a player to need time to recover from injuries. We obviously haven't seen him in this context of Serie A, but I do think he's going somewhere where he has a great manager. He has a clear opportunity in terms of the way the squad is set up to establish himself as the alternative to Dovbyk up front. He's moving to a league where we've seen several other English players be successful in the last couple of years, and a club where we've seen a centre forward go and be successful. That there's no reason structurally why it shouldn't be a success. It's going to come down to him as a footballer and whether he can make the most of his opportunity.
I'm hopeful for him. I mean, I think the West Ham half of it, it's really difficult to judge strikers at West Ham. You know, you've got so many good strikers who've not quite managed to get it done at West Ham. They are consistent breakers of centre forwards, and as Nicky says, you factor in the injuries, you factor in the fact that he came in halfway through the season, not at the same physical level as those guys, and coming into a bad team as well. I think it was very difficult for him to make an impression at West Ham. But I think if you were talking about Marcus Rashford before, Nicky, being energised by the atmosphere, when you see Ferguson getting off the plane and met by all those fans at the airport, and he's like, did I sign for like Galatasaray or Fenerbahce by accident?
Yeah.
You know, it was amazing to see that reception. And I think he's in a good position because, as you said, there are so many similarities between him and Dovbyk, both in terms of their size and their technical intelligence. I think you can see him linking with Dybala just like Dovbyk was able to on occasion. It took Dovbyk a while to adapt to Serie A last season, I thought, after that season in Girona. And so I feel it takes some of the pressure off Dovbyk, takes some of the pressure off Ferguson, because it's not like you're in the team, do it now. You know, they can bleed him in a little bit more gradually. And I would back them like straight away, because we know what the Europa League is like in this post teams dropping down from the Champions League sort of world. They're going to play a lot of games in Europe next season. Like if Roma didn't get to at least the quarterfinals, I would be really surprised.
Yeah, the conundrum actually is that, first of all, more things that help him be a success. Any striker getting to play with Paulo Dybala to link up with is going to be advantage. Dybala is a wonderful, wonderful footballer when he's there, and is a selfless footballer as well, who will give him the opportunities. The problem is, out of that trio, immediately your head goes, okay, but which of those players are we most confident won't be there for half a season? Dybala, because he's never there for half the season. So then can you make Dovbyk and Ferguson work as a partnership if you want to? That's where it seems a bit less obvious. But Gasperini really typically does play something like a front three. It varies in its exact shape and the way it's structured, but it's normally something like a front three. So I don't think we're going to see him and Dovbyk on the pitch that much together. It'll be more of a question of how the pieces around him are shaped. And sorry to hammer this button over and over again on these two shows this week, but Roma are still quite early in their transfer activities, and I think exactly the other options they have in that attack are still yet to be determined. But I expect that there will be additions in the wide forward position before the end of this window as well.
They are also very keen on attacking midfield players and more energetic, younger attacking midfield players to play off a big target man as well. So clearly Dovbyk and Ferguson are going to have a massive role in that.
And let's not forget, when in Roma, do as the Romans do, what does that actually mean in terms of Evan Ferguson? What should he do to give himself the chance of succeeding?
In terms of success, I always think that the players who make the effort to properly commit themselves to living as an Italian would, whatever that looks like, and it's always a bit different in different cities, of course, but still, you look at players like Scott McTominay and how much he's thrown himself into life in Naples, but also non-British players. It was same with Dries Mertens there. I remember having a long conversation with Fikayo Tomori about how his day was very different in Milan in terms of when you wake up, when you have a coffee, these things to what it was in England. That stuff all matters. But I actually think for Ferguson, the biggest part isn't that. The biggest part is going to be, as a very young striker who's got great physical tools, he's going to get a very intense course in, and now you've got to learn to find the space in a more tactical league. These are cliches, but they are still true, in which you're going to have that space, you're going to find it even more restricted. And again, coming back to the player we talked about yesterday, Ademola Lookman, I've heard him talk quite at length about how much he learned under Gasperini, and about how he changed as a footballer and just understanding the space inside the box and timing movements and those things, and about how he think that helped him to become so much more effective. That's the opportunity before Ferguson right now. It's the challenge before Ferguson as well, is can you become a more intelligent footballer as well as a more well-rounded footballer. But I think that is the challenge that Serie A as a league continues to set people, is, okay, you're going to have some things that maybe are going to be your strengths coming from the Premier League. You're more used to carrying a physical strength into your challenges with players, perhaps than some other players are here. But you're going to need to learn to find the space when the space is less and less, and that's going to be the thing that I think he'll sink or swim on.
This question from BTNT on X: is Real Madrid's potential sale of Rodrygo a mistake? Should they instead move on someone like Vinicius? That's a challenge.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. And I don't think Real Madrid are necessarily ready to answer it yet. Because, of course, the idea of a sale of Rodrygo has been hanging over them really since pre-Kylian Mbappe signed. Because if you go back to the 2024 Champions League final, when Rodrygo is asked about his future by different broadcasters from Spain and Brazil and gives different answers. One that suggests that, well, maybe if I don't feel like a key piece, I might consider moving on, which really angered the club, by the way, in the build up to the Champions League final, even though everything turned out fine in the end. Look, I think he's a player who's kind of, no one who knows him is in doubt of how good he is, but he's kind of slightly damned by the fact that he's so versatile and he's so willing. So he's someone who is good enough to be a centre forward for one of the best teams in Europe, but you know how much work he can get through on the wings as well. He does a good defensive job in occupying defenders and stopping attacking fullbacks from getting out, as much as he does in being able to create stuff in an attacking sense. He's incredibly altruistic. He's a team player who scores big goals and creates goals as well. But this narrative that's built up about he needs to go somewhere and be the main guy. Why? Why does he need to be the main guy? Now, I guess like people look at him and think with that talent, he should be the main guy. But the whole point that makes him so good is the fact that he's an altruist, the fact that he's a team player. So the idea of like you put him somewhere and build a team around him, for some players that makes sense. We were talking about Xavi Simons yesterday, for example. For Rodrygo, I don't think that necessarily does make sense. You know, he's got the talent of a superstar, but he's got the attitude, an output of someone you want in the trenches with you. So finding the right spot for him, I guess, is why so many clubs are interested in him. Like Paris Saint-Germain, the most recent, have been credited with an interest in him. I can totally see him fitting at PSG. Now, you might look at that front three for whatever it is and think, well, where's he fit? I think long term, they might end up playing Désiré Doué a little bit deeper in midfield, as he has played already. I can see him playing as part of a midfield three. Perhaps even if you've got a more orthodox defensive midfielder who sometimes relieves Vitinha and plays instead of him. But anyway, if we're talking about this being a choice between Rodrygo and Vinicius, this maybe wasn't even a question even during the Club World Cup, because the information that we were getting during the Club World Cup is Vinicius has already signed a new deal and it'll be announced after the Club World Cup. After the Club World Cup, when we're expecting it to be announced, it becomes clear that not only has he not signed a new deal, but they're still quite a long way apart in terms of wage numbers. Now, Vinicius is always in his entourage and his agent are always using this, well, he could go to the Saudi Pro League. Do you know how much they're prepared to offer him? They're kind of using the Saudi Pro League, I think, as this bogeyman. Now, he could go there tomorrow. They would, a Saudi Pro League club would pay the money for him. They'd pay Real Madrid a fortune that would make all their financial dreams come true. And they would make all Vinny's financial dreams come true as well. But you have to ask, if he really wanted to go, would he not have gone already? And could they have brokered a deal with Real Madrid, a Saudi Pro League club, that would have been more than acceptable to them? Yes, I think they could. So I think a key part of these negotiations, if Vinny and his people are turning around and going, you know how much he could get in the Saudi Pro League, not only is it not a question of money, because Real Madrid are never going to come anywhere near matching what a Saudi Pro League club could or would offer him, but if you're Real Madrid, you sit there and go, all right then, if they're offering that much, go. Because he clearly doesn't want to, or he clearly doesn't 100% at least want to, because he would have gone already. Financially, there's a great argument for selling Vinny Jr. to a Saudi club if you can get him to accept that deal, because you can get a transfer fee, maybe even a world record transfer fee, which puts you in a position to accelerate the rebuild that we became aware during last season that Real Madrid definitely needed, rather than a slight readjustment. And the other thing is, whatever the team looks like in 2 months, 6 months, a year, you can definitely find a place for Rodrygo. And Rodrygo is exactly the sort of mobile, versatile forward that Xabi Alonso likes.
You see what a gentleman Andy is, Nicky. Such a gentleman. He hasn't even mentioned the fact that if Vinny were to go, it solves a huge problem from Real Madrid in terms of Kylian Mbappe, amongst others.
Yeah, it's kind of what the point Andrew's making about Rodrygo being so versatile, and everyone, when they look at the shape of the team and basically everyone wanting to occupy that space on the left, and Rodrygo's the one who can play on the right. Rodrygo wants to play on the left as well. It's just sometimes that's the one who's willing to make the step and be that person for the team. So
he's the only one of that three that you're getting any sort of effort off the ball with at the moment. And so I guess more and more people are looking at it like, what does a Xabi Alonso side with both Vinicius and Mbappe in it look like? Right?
Yeah.
Because they're largely compromised when they haven't got the ball. Mm-hmm. Now, we know Vinicius can do that stuff off the ball. He's not at the moment.
Yeah. Which is the whole philosophical conversation, I suppose, with Real Madrid is Xabi Alonso going to be able to, by being more of a hands-on manager, do something, get something out of them that Ancelotti hasn't. And I'm not sure it's as simple as being more hands-on, because I think actually at a certain point, I don't want to say the word egos, because I think that makes it sound like they're all just being spoiled brats, which I don't think it's as simple as that. I think people who are very talented in a very challenging profession are entitled to feel a certain way about, I've worked hard and I deserve to be treated like this. But there is an excessive of that mindset in that group. And I think that you certainly could argue that Rodrygo is the more, the easier piece to work with. Having said that, I get the impression that Rodrygo is not exactly content forever to be treated like that, and maybe he also wouldn't mind just leaving because he not because he wants to be a star somewhere else, to bring it back to what you said before, and it's not being a star somewhere else, but also when you've been underappreciated for a certain amount of time, maybe you'd rather just be happier out of it.
Clearly, as you can hear, we're going to be following this drama over the next few weeks on OTC. So don't go anywhere. Make sure you subscribe so you get the final denouement, as it were. This question from Freddie on Instagram. The Bundesliga as a whole has lost a lot of talent in the last couple of windows. I think it's fair to say. Will the league suffer because of that this year? The idea of the Bundesliga being a sort of a selling league, or at least a feeder league for other greater, bigger leagues in Europe, if there are any.
And maybe more will go this summer as well. We were talking about Leipzig yesterday, and maybe a couple of big names moving on from there. I think this is less a league problem and more a Bayer Leverkusen problem, because clearly there's a changing of the guard with Xabi Alonso going. We've seen Wirtz leave when the assumption for a long time had been that he would stay in the league with Bayern. Although whether you think one of the best players in the league going to Bayern is a positive step for the league, even if it means he's staying in the league, I think is a totally different question. And I think how Leverkusen recover and do they continue to be a contender, I think is a big question to how good the Bundesliga can realistically be this season, and how compelling the title challenge can be this season, the title race can be this season. I think the Eintracht Frankfurt thing is less of an issue, because of course you look at Ekitike going now, Omar Mamouche going in January, but that's their model. They want to sell those players, just like they wanted to sell Pacho, just like they wanted to sell Kolo Muani, they wanted to sell Ala, Rebic, Jovic, all of those that have turned out to be unbelievable details, and people are belatedly twigging what expert traders Eintracht Frankfurt are. Now, I think the other thing to factor in is the way that Bayern have changed their transfer market behaviour. So if we go back a couple of years, they'd rarely spent over 40 million euros on a player. You know, that record of Corentin Tolisso going from Lyon to Bayern and being the most expensive player in Bundesliga history stood for a fair bit, which is ridiculous, really, when you consider what was happening in the rest of the football world. So with Bayern for a long time, it was smallish fees compared to at least their elite European rivals, and big wages. Now that has changed a lot, because since then you've had Luke Hernandez, you've had Harry Kane, and they may end up spending like north of 60 million on Nick Voltemada and closer to 100 million euros on Luis Diaz, although they'll have to do a bit of shifting, and maybe Joao Palhinha ends up being a casualty of that. We'll wait and see. But in terms of talent coming into the Bundesliga, I guess it depends, Freddie, on your point of view. Say if Luis Diaz ends up at Bayern, is that a great thing for the Bundesliga? Well, if you stick in a player like Luis Diaz and you move Nick Voltemada from Stuttgart to Bayern, it makes Bayern better. It makes Bayern more star-tastic. It puts us in a position where we can say, oh, this league has got loads of great players in it. If all the best ones are at one club, it's not a great thing for the league.
All of European football is asking the same question to some greater or less degree, but to what Andy's been talking about, though, which is, I suppose, what is the realistic goal for clubs, and what is the realistic goal for a league in terms of making sure that the brand of the league is maximised, making sure that the brand of the league is growing, and that financially are getting the most out of your opportunities, which these are massively affected by how your best clubs perform. And in the case of the Bundesliga, I think it's Bayern Munich have won, 12 out of the last 13 Bundesliga titles? To me, the Bundesliga was most interesting when Bayer Leverkusen were winning, because I'm not someone who's following full-time the Bundesliga. So it's much more compelling. It makes me want to tune in more when it's like, oh, it's not just going to be Bayern this season. On the other hand, is it better for the league and the TV deals and the revenues when Bayern Munich are winning the Champions League, as they did 4 years ago? These are the questions that I think all of European football is grappling with. I do think that having covered Italian football through some lows and highs over the last 2 decades, one thing I would say is whenever stars go, and they do go, there are definitely better or worse years. There are years when you watch the league and think it was lacking something this season. It was lacking a bit of magic. But there are always new stars. There's always another footballer who really desperately wants to make their name and is going to step up and take that opportunity. So I don't really believe in the end in this idea that all the stars do just vacuum away and disappear, because there's always another footballer. And actually, as rich as the Premier League is, as rich as the Saudi Pro League is, there simply aren't enough spaces on those teams to get all the good ones.
Yep.
So there's always going to be good footballers in the Bundesliga, even as some of the big ones might disappear somewhere else.
Oh, is that the time already? Well, good, because it's time for our Game of the Week. Each week, we ask our experts to recommend a game for you to watch at the weekend. And just as importantly, especially for me, they also suggest the food that you should be having with it.
So we're going to Denmark. Second weekend of the Danish Super League.
Yeah.
This weekend. Saturday, 5 p.m. FC Copenhagen, the champions, are at home to Vejle, which from Jutland, which I think is worth looking at. An opening.
We say Jylland, but Jutland will work. The
Right.
Battle of Jutland in the Second World War, etc.
Thank you.
Thank
you. I enjoyed the assist there. That's what it's all about. It's a team game. Copenhagen are really interesting this season, I think, because they've just entered the Champions League as well. They played Drita from Kosovo and beat them this week. We've got the second leg next week, so they'll be warming up for that. And how they effectively do so, I think, is really interesting. So Copenhagen have...
Copenhagen.
Thank you. FC Core have got to work out what they're going to do ahead of that second leg. Now, they won at Viborg on the opening weekend of the season, but something big has happened this week. Not just that they've entered into the Champions League, but they've lost one of their best young players, Victor Froholt, who's signed for Porto this week. So he played in the opening game of the season. He won't be there because obviously he's gone to Portugal already. So the Copenhagen model has been really interesting over the last couple of years. They've tried to make themselves a sort of hub of Scandinavian talent, not just young Danish players and picking up the best players who are coming back to Scandinavia. You look at Thomas Delaney going there, for example, and he's still playing for them now. But like the way they brought off Rooney Bargi from Malmö, for example, and they developed him. Obviously, he made an impact the season before last in the Champions League. They've just sold him to Barcelona, though, because he had a difficult last season, not for the sort of money they were hoping for. But Froholt going to Porto is something that I think will be a bit of a shock. They've made a nice amount of money out of it. It's around 22 million euros. But it does leave a bit of a hole for the moment. And I wonder how they'll reinvest the money, because we talked about Leipzig and their development of players. Now, Copenhagen haven't been shy in bringing in those experienced players as well. And they just brought across Yusufa Moukoko, who's a young player of enormous promise and still is a very young player, but has come off the back of a really bad season on loan at Nice, so they need him to be able to do something. So many questions about them. Looking forward to how it's going. There is no question over the food, because on the corner of the street by Parken Stadion, you have a hot dog stand which does unbelievable hot dogs. I know you always want to talk about Pinks in Los Angeles.
No,
this is a level. Yeah. I am telling you. I remember taking my youngest son to a game at FC Copenhagen many years ago when we were on holiday, and the older one decided he didn't want to come. The phone rang, and he was like, "Daddy," and I was like, "What is it? Are you wishing you'd come to the game?" And he goes, "No, but I want you to bring me home one of those brilliant hot dogs." So we had to do that on the way out. We had to leave after about 70 minutes so I could bring him one of the hot dogs.
Oh, that's magic.
It's called Pølse, for one thing.
Okay.
Pølse, they call it Pølse. And may I say, and I do agree with you, best hot dogs ever. May I say, you put both the mustard and the tomato ketchup. That's the way to eat it. I'm just giving you a little bit. You did ask for
I'm
assistance.
going to turn it over to our culinary adjudicator here.
She won't go for hot dogs, but which game will she go for, Nicky Bandini?
Oh, it's the obvious one. It's the Euro 2025 final. And I'm not even going to pretend there's a tiny bit of me that's heartbroken. It's not Italy against Spain in the final. So close. I've got, it's a bit of a personal feelings about this one that I'm shaking up with at the moment, I suppose. It's obviously an incredible game on paper. I think it is the two best teams in the world right now, which is fantastic. And I think what I love about it in a footballing sense is I think that you really have two teams who can match each other, not just for the quality of their first 11s, but for the depth as well. Obviously, this tournament has become about Ajamang and how incredible she's been off the bench, this extraordinary teenage talent for England. But then you look at Spain as well, and you look at how De Castillo has come off the bench for them and been goal scorer, provider in the last round for Bonmati, and that again, just seeing two brilliant football teams who had fraught routes to get here, and all of that is exciting. But without wanting to make it too personal, I'm going to my aunt's funeral on Saturday, which is the day before the final. The final is on Sunday, which is also my birthday, and the funeral is going to be not quite in my dad's hometown, but very close to my dad's hometown, because my dad's from a very small town in Italy, and so it's going to be very close to where it's going to be the same cemetery where he's buried, and very close to that. And one of my not my first, but one of my early profound football memories is watching the 1994 World Cup final with my family in another town very close to there. And so it would have been even more special if it was an Italian final, for sure, to be back in that part of the world. And again, it's really like small town Italy. It's not the big cities, and doing that. But, my family's half English too. So getting to watch a final with my mum and my brother in that part of the world is still going to be very special. And for that reason, even though it's quite incongruous with the two teams, my meal is going to be for certain tagliatelle alla ragu. Keep it simple, eat what's good to what's local, and hopefully have a great game of football to watch.
And just to remind you, so Andy has gone for this Denmark massive game, Copenhagen versus Valier. It's Saturday at 5 p.m. and Nicky's pick was England versus Spain at the Euros final, which kicks off at 5 p.m. on Sunday.